I want to just introduce myself and say I live in Essex County. So I live in Manchester and lived for many years before that in Wenham. And then we moved out of state and then returned about 6 years ago back to Essex County. So I know a number of you, and it's just been, but not all of you by any means. And it just is, it's lovely to be back and you know, renewing my ties to Essex County. And so thank you all for attending, for committing the next 90 minutes or so to this topic. And I want to start off just by telling you a story about a man who made a big difference to me, even though I never met him. And his name was Edward Mulkins, and I got to know him only through his obituary. And it sounded like he was a great guy, but there was a line in his obituary that I just never forgot. And that was that it was said of him that he was a total success as a human being. And I just thought, man, it doesn't get any better than that. And isn't that kind of, you know, what we're all sort of going for, really, is to think of ourselves that we're trying to get closer and closer to our ideas of what it would be to be a successful human being. And I know that would be different for every person, but chances are that it would have, you'd have a sense that you were living true to your values, that you were, that you would be, that when the, you know, when you left this world, that the door wouldn't close too fast behind you, that you were making a positive difference in some way with how you were living your life, that you were essentially creating, that you'd created a legacy. And, but how do you, so that's, it's probably true for you, it's certainly true for your clients, this idea that they'd like to feel as though they were being successful as human beings. But how do you get a handle on what that word legacy means to your clients anyway? How do you take it out of the clouds and bring it down into their lives, into their planning, and into their giving? And so the purpose of the presentation today is really to just give you some strategies for doing that, to make the topic of legacy easier to talk about and easier to relate to and easier to bring into the conversations you're having with your clients, whether it's estate planning clients, financial planning, whether it's people who are thinking about philanthropy. And so specifically, we're going to be looking at two different things. One of which, the first half is going to be about how to leverage the stories that your clients tell you voluntarily, how to initiate them, how to encourage them to tell stories about their lives to you, and how to mine those stories, how to see what you can find in those stories in terms of understanding their values and their priorities. And then the second half is we're going to be talking about personal legacy documents, ethical wills, expressions of intent, whether that's a philanthropic expression of intent or a letter of wishes to trustees. So we're going to be talking about those as instruments of thinking about and creating legacy. And how those instruments can be bridges for you. Introducing those instruments to folks, to your clients, can be bridges to talk about the larger question of legacy. So this is going to be a really interactive presentation. It's late in the day. I want to make sure nobody falls asleep. And so I've got a couple of breakout sessions planned. I want you to experience what I'm suggesting. I want you to bring it into your life first before you think about how to bring it into your client's life. I want to say there's no break here built in. So if you need to leave for a second, great, come back, but come back quickly because we have a whole lot of content to cover. So before we go any further, I just want to talk a little bit about my own background, just briefly. I'm a writer by trade. I was a freelance writer for many years, writing personal interest stories in newspapers in towns that I lived in, including for many years in Hamilton Wenham. I wrote for the Hamilton Wenham Chronicle. And I did a lot of personal interest stories, and I learned over and over how people really like to get some perspective on their lives, and they like to see evidence of what was important to them on paper, in the paper. And many times people would say to me who read those stories, I never knew that about that person, even though, I've known her my whole life. So I just learned over and over again how important it is for people to get perspective on their lives and how enjoyable that is for other people. Most people want to feel like they've left some kind of a record of their lives, of their life experiences. But, most people are not going to write an autobiography. And so in 2001, I ran across the idea of an ethical will, which is a personal legacy letter. And I thought that was such a beautiful idea that you didn't have to write an autobiography to create some kind of a record of your life. Some of the most important things you wanted to communicate to the next generations, you could put it in a letter. And I just thought that was a very beautiful idea, and that it was the missing piece of estate planning. You know, we spend a whole lot of time thinking about what we're going to transmit to our loved ones in sort of a tangible sense, but the idea that you have other things to give them also that are intangible. I thought you put those two things together, tangible and intangible, you've got kind of a picture that answer the question of, you know, what do I want to leave behind? And so I just thought it was a beautiful idea. And so I kind of pivoted my writing and, you know, to focus on these, to ghost write them. And I marketed I eventually, within a few years, I wrote a guidebook, which is now in its 4th edition. And I started marketing my services to people like you, because you were already dealing with people who are thinking about some of these things. And in the process, I learned a whole lot about what you do. I had thought financial planners and estate planning attorneys, they just dealt with money and legal documents. I learned the first thing you're in the relationship business. You know, you're in the business of needing to establish trust with people and deepen relationships to understand them, understand something about their lives, their priorities, their values, what kind of a difference that they want to make. That is sort of key to what you do. And you don't have a lot of time, you know, to do this. You don't meet with your clients that often. Some of you are paid by the hour. And you've got specific issues that you need to deal with, problems they bring for you to solve. And oftentimes that picture of legacy, what they want their legacy to be, that just seems like maybe just kind of too big, too vague, you know, to get into. And so oftentimes those conversations about what legacy means to a client, those conversations don't happen for many different reasons. And yet your clients care about it a lot. Even if they're not saying so, it's something that they really care about. So before we go any further, I want to kind of get a handle on what this idea of what this word legacy means anyway. I mean, I think it's one of those words that's like really vague and more than vaguely intimidating. I mean, if you talk about someone that's left a legacy, chances are what you might think about them is, well, first of all, they're dead, because we tend to define legacy when people have after they've died. And maybe think about related to lots of money or somehow being exceptional in some way. And I just don't think that's a very helpful way to think about legacy. And today I have another way that I want you to think about it. And I want you to think about your legacy as being something very simple, very down to earth, and something that happens every day. And that is that your legacy is your influence. It is your influence. It's the difference that you make in the lives of other people during your life and after your life, and whether you know them or not. And I want you to keep that definition in mind for this presentation, that your legacy, your client's legacy is influence, their influence. So your influence and their influence. So I want to get right into this idea of legacy as influence and have a little, and have some fun with it. So I'm going to share my screen and get into my PowerPoint here. Here we go. Okay, so up on the screen, you should see a slide of a conversational prompt that says, share a memory about a person who had an impact on you. So this is one of the 12 cards that make up a set of cards that I developed called Life Legacy cards. And each one of the cards provides a really interesting open-ended prompt to get into a conversation that you might not otherwise have, whether that's a conversation with a client or a member of your family or a friend. So 12 doorways into pretty extraordinary conversations. And so I want you to walk through this doorway right now. For people, that was just part one of the exercise. And I have to say that when I do live presentations, which I love to do, and I have an exercise like this, the sound in the room is oftentimes deafening, you know, and I get to see smiles on people's faces and laughter and sometimes tears. And I really miss that. It's very, you know, disembodied here, although I did have a great conversation with my partner, Matt. So anyway, but we have part two of this exercise. And that is, I want to have you have the opportunity of taking that story that you told and heard to another level, and to the level of values. So this is helping you understand what you can pull out and find in a story that somebody tells you. So I'm going to share the screen again because there's a set of exercise, a set of directions for you to follow. And this is what I want you to do. You've got 5 minutes to do this, so it's a little bit shorter than the time before. And so you'll need to split your time up accordingly. But these are the directions. So you as listener, can you think of the story that you heard? Can you think of a value that you think that person seemed to exemplify in what you heard? Can you name a value that they seem to be living by? And then you as speaker, respond to that. You know, is that true? Is that a value that they did hold or not? And what are a couple of values that the person that you described exemplify and hold? Can you name a couple of values that you attach to them? And then, are those your values? You know, to what degree are those your values? Do you share those values or not? Or do you share some of them but not all of them? So have a chance. This is a chance for you to reflect on the values that person represented, and then the degree to which you share those. So I hope you have fun with this too. You've got 5 minutes.
Okay, I'll take it. So what I learned is how influential coaches really are. I was an athlete growing up. I still think of my coaches all the time. One in particular, field hockey coach, would run next to me, and she goes, "I'm 3 times your age and I'm running faster than you, Murray. What's going on?" So, you know, tough love like that, and, you know, little things, little sayings, you know, and coach, when I think of a coach, I think of a volunteer, and I think of someone that has to lead by example and wrangle all these kids together. And, you know, that does leave a lasting impression. I still think of all my coaches often, some more than others, but they definitely formed me as an individual for sure.
Awesome. Thank you for being willing to jump right back in there. I think we've got.
Yeah, and thank you. Sorry for that little technical glitch. Anyone else want to share what you experienced as either a speaker or a listener?
Oh, it looks like Jack. Jack, go ahead.
So I was just going to say that we use the word legacy in our discussions with clients, but usually it's either about an asset like a home, we call it, is that a legacy property, for example, or like just today in a conversation, the client, without our prompting, said, you know, I also want to make sure I leave a legacy for my family. And he was talking about a certain amount of money. But I imagine that in all these conversations we just had, we weren't really talking about money.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. So that brings me just to a bridge to, and I'm going to move on here because we still have a lot to cover here, but that's the perfect segue into talking about, look what the stories did there. And, you know, stories are pretty powerful ways to, first of all, relax people and bring them into the room. You know, isn't that, and that's what you do when you, essentially, when you use your time, some time for small talk, you're actually essentially asking people to tell you a story because you know that relaxes them. You know you're going to find out information about them. And if you just think about the potential of going just a one step further and thinking about what is behind that story, you can get into a conversation about values and a conversation about legacy pretty easily and naturally. So I want to show you, that's what I want to show you here on the next couple of screens, about this sort of protocol that I have, you know, this kind of process that I've designed around using stories. So what you just did here was uncover a story, right? In the first half. And then you explored a little bit about the meaning and values behind that story. And all it took was just a follow-up question, a couple follow-up questions to get at values. You got that pretty easily. And values are one of those things, kind of like a legacy. They're sort of vague. It's hard necessarily to get people to identify their values. If they give them a list of values, they'll say, oh, those all look good to me. But to really understand a person's true values, you see it in context, you see in the choices that they made, in the way that they've lived their lives. So stories are an ideal way to see what's really important to people. Then you also have the opportunity to take a conversation to yet another step, which is to really think about how those values apply to the story they told you. So for instance, to be able to take that story that you heard and bring it back into the work that you're doing. And this is not going to work for every story you hear, but it may very well work with a number of them. And it also depends on the reason that you're meeting with clients and what the purpose of the meeting is. But you have the opportunity to really say, well, now that we've talked a little bit about the values, you've identified some values, are those the values you want your planning or your giving to reflect? And, you know, the answer is, well, either yes or no. You know, that yes, I want those values to be reflected in what I'm doing, or no, they're not really relevant. Either one, that's an interesting, it's an interesting aspect of the conversation, interesting for you to know. And you can say, well, you know, what are the values that you do want your planning to reflect? And that gives you a whole different way of a different kind of conversation. And then, or to say, you know, does this story remind you of things you would like to do? Well, I don't know about you, but in my conversation with Matt, he was really inspired to think about the person that he told me about, really inspires him to think about the things he'd like to do, he'd still like to do in his life. So does it remind you of the things you'd like to do, either for yourself or for the benefit of others, either in your family or beyond? So there is so much that you can do with, you have so much opportunity to mine what information people give you in your stories they tell you, and bring them back to the work that you're doing. So this is an image of the whole card set, the Life Legacy card set, which comes in, there's a small set of cards and a big set of cards. They both look the same on the front, but one is just 3 by 3 for ease of people picking a card. And then there's a facilitator set, which is 8 by 8, which has actually has a 3-step flow of what we just went through, explicitly laid out in the back. So how do you get somebody to tell you to go into story mode? What's a follow-up prompt you can take them to explore their meaning and values? And then this action question, what is what we just talked about? How does that impact the difference that you want to make in the lives of other people, either inside your family or outside your family? So those are the cards. And I just want to say that there is, say that there is one card in here that's different, which is the legacy card, which gets you explicitly into a conversation about legacy directly. And instead of those 3 steps, there's these 3 steps to think about the difference you're making now, someone that's impacted you in the past, the legacy you're carrying from other people, and then what does it say about the future, your image, you know, of a future legacy that you want to create when you're no longer here. So that card is a little bit different. But the main point I want to make about this is that, yeah, those cards are great. They're great props. They're really fun to use, either in ice-breaking meetings or getting to know somebody or refreshing kind of a stale conversation. They're wonderful to use. But what I'm talking about is bigger than those cards, that you can really mine any story for those 3 things. So let's just say someone comes into your office, you ask them what they did over the weekend, and they said, you know, I played golf. I played golf with my daughter. And you can, with one question, doesn't take very long, you can say, you know, gee, it's really neat you're teaching your daughter how to play golf. Who taught you how to play golf? So you get a little bit more information there, a little bit of a story, and you can then easily then transition to the next phase of this, which was, what does golf have to tell? What is your love of golf? What does it tell me? And what does it tell you about what's most important to you? You know, what are the values that it represents in your life? And that's, they probably say, well, I never really thought about that before. It makes a very interesting conversation. You know, what are the values? Well, family, being together, being outside in a beautiful place, love of nature, you know, financial security, because gosh, I can afford to play the game. So these are the things that my love of golf really reflects about me. And if you want to, you can take it even to that other deeper level, which is taking them back now to the planning, whatever you're doing with them, estate planning, financial planning, thinking about their giving. You know, are those the values that you just told me? How relevant are they to the work we're doing? Again, you're going to get a yes, no answer, but either answer is really interesting. And then, you know, does what we've been talking about here, does it remind you of the things you'd like to still do for yourself or for the benefit of others in your family or beyond? Well, probably they're going to feel inspired by what they told you, and they may think, yeah, actually, there are things I know that I really want to do. And it may, and that, you know, this story reminds them, and it may very well bring them back to the work that they're doing with you, and how they're going to spend their money, and how they're going to think about giving. Maybe that whole idea of loving being out in beautiful places is going to inspire them to give to conservation efforts. And you certainly have a partner in ECCF to help you think about how they might do that. So you just have a great opportunity to use stories. Don't waste the opportunity. Every time you meet with somebody, whether you're meeting with them on Zoom or you're meeting with them in person, you are spending a certain amount of chit-chat time with them. So think about how you can use that chit-chat time to go a little bit deeper, spend a little bit more time, and really explore their values, what their story says about what's important to them. And if you want, if it's appropriate, to be able to take it to that third level of, you know, let's bring it back. Is that related to the work that we're doing, whatever that is? We are running a little bit behind schedule. And so I want to get right into the second part of this presentation, which is about ethical wills. But if you have a question in the chat about what we just talked about, or thought about, well, how would this actually apply? How would I actually set up these conversations? If you want to have any questions like about that, put them in the chat and we'll cover it at the end. Sound good, Stacy? Okay. We're going to get now into the whole topic of ethical wills, and I'm going to stop my share right now because I want to take a look at you here. Let's see here. So what is an ethical will anyway? Ethical wills have a very stern sounding name, don't they? They put ethical and will in the same phrase. You know, it's a little bit scary sounding. But what is an ethical will? Whether you've heard of it or not, let me give you what my interpretation of a contemporary ethical will is. It's a personal legacy. It's a personal letter, a non-binding letter that sets down evidence of what's important to you. And they are, in the end, they're letters of respect, mutual respect, letters of respect to both give and to be able to receive. And from the point of view of estate and financial planning, they are tools for complete communication, whether that's for personal or practical reasons. And whether you choose to share your life, share your ethical during your life, only choose to share it, or it's only shared after your life, regardless, it's written with the intent that it's beyond you. And that's what makes it different than any other kind of a letter. So this particular kind of letter, the ethical will, gets its name and gets its spirit of intentionality actually from the Jewish tradition. So 800 years ago, you first see evidence of fathers writing to their sons what it means to live a worthy or ethical life. And so here's an excerpt from one of them that was written in 1190. He's talking to his son about money. And he said, there's an olden proverb, go to bed without supper and rise without debt. And he then goes on to say, defile not the honor of thy countenance by borrowing. May thy creator save thee from that habit. So long before you suggested to your clients that they not go into credit card debt, our man here 800 years ago is saying that to his son. And then let's fast forward, go back about 100 years ago. We have another one that he says, somewhere among these papers is a will made out by a lawyer. It seems sensitive. It seems sensible when I made it, but it only refers to material things which we enjoy temporarily. And I am more concerned with having you inherit something that's vastly more important. Those are examples of older ethical wills that come specifically out of the Jewish, the Jewish tradition. Well, in 2001, I read about this idea of the ethical will in an article in the Boston Globe, and I was just like, wow, that's just like so beautiful. They're so simple. Everybody should do this. And my take on it, as I said, when I said in my introduction, I thought this is just the logical piece this is a missing piece of estate planning. And I got so fired up about thinking about how to get the word out that this is not something that belongs only to Jewish men. This is something that applies to anybody. regardless of their faith, regardless of their gender, regardless of how much money they have. And so the contemporary use of them is exactly the same as the old one, in that they're instruments for intentional communication. They're simple and beautiful tools for intentional communication between the generations. But we don't live in 1190 anymore. In 1190, that first example that I read you, it's very top down, Father knows best. Do as I say because you do as I say because I told you. And the old ethical wills are really, they rule from beyond the grave. Absolutely, and they're very stern and very lecturish. But their love is evident, their sense of responsibility as being, a guide, and giving them words of wisdom, that's very much comes through. Their love and concern and sense of responsibility, as I said, really comes through. So they're beautiful, but they're very prescriptive. The contemporary idea is not that kind of, I know best, you do as I say. They are gifts, your personal gifts to the people that you care most about, and to the audience of your choice, whether that's your children or your grandchildren, heirs unborn, extended family, your parents, your spouse, a trustee, the successors of your philanthropy. They are gifts of you to be taken in as the audience finds helpful. The best way to get a sense of contemporary ethical wills is to listen to some contemporary ones, some excerpts of contemporary ones. And for the most part, these are ones that I've helped people write. Although you certainly do not need a professional writer to create an ethical will. Everybody should do it. And everyone says it the best. So I'm just going to go back into the slides. And I'm just going to, just so you have something to look at while I'm reading. So this first example is a gift of common history and a gift of the values of this man. So this is a man who created a dynasty trust. He was a self-made man. He was going to be passing on money way down the line to people, a lot of people who weren't going to know him. And he wanted to give the money in some kind of context. And so he writes in his introduction, "What I ultimately want to pass on to you is far greater than financial advantage, but a deep appreciation of the collective history and values you carry in your bones. This is your true wealth." And he talks about not only the history of his company, but the values he felt built the company, which he traced to his grandparents. Some were Chinese and some were Austrian. And so he wanted his descendants and the beneficiaries of this trust to get this letter from him with their first distribution, which was going to describe the history behind the money, give them some context and to celebrate the heritage that they all shared. So that's a gift of values and a shared heritage. So this is an example of a gift. Again, another gift of this, a gift of a point of view. It's a gift of a character. It's a gift of values. Again, lightly given in a list. So while that other document you read was around 10 pages long, this is a one-page document where this man created a list of the things he knew to be true. And he just wrote them down very quickly. It took him about 20 minutes. And this is 5 of the 15 things that he wrote down. And his personality comes through loud and clear, even in a short list. You need to kick off the sheets. Busy is good. No one has a lock on a way to do something. There's value somewhere in everyone. And a joke is almost always in order. And I love this idea. I love this example of a list, because a list, when you think about the things you most, that you want people to know and understand from you, you could say a lot of different things. If you kind of answer that question, what do I want to make sure that I've communicated? That could be a lot of things, couldn't it? And it could be overwhelming what you might want to say. And when you create an ethical will, what you're doing is taking like a 30,000-foot view of your life and picking out a few most important things that would seem timeless and helpful to people, and that you feel as though is important for them to know, and that reflects who you really are. You don't want to create something that sounds like the Boy Scout oath. It's got to sound like you, or it's not going to have any impact. And I love this, that in a very short space, this is a page, he was able to transmit a lot of his personality, a lot of his character, and a lot of his values. So this next example is a gift of the acknowledgement of the pride, the love and pride, and the acknowledgement of well, let me back up. This was written by a woman who wrote to her son when he was really young, wrote an ethical will to her son, and now he's 30 years old, and she wanted to update his ethical. She wanted to update the document, and so just like a lot of the old documents that are created over time, because you're a work in progress, your audience is a work in progress, so it would be natural to think you might want to add to it or change it as you grew older and they grew older. So she added to this, and now he's a young man. He's in his 30s, and so she is sharing with him a bit. She has a number of paragraphs where she's talking about several themes of relationships and kindness and work and health, and she shares a bit of family history, and she says to him, by now you're in your 30s, you probably know these things already. But I'm telling you this because I want you to know what my experience has taught me and how I feel and see the world. So she's saying to him, take from this what you will, what you can. And I'm not telling you this because I think you don't know it. And, that is to me the heart of the ethical will. It's a gift of yourself. People are going to take from it what they will. And she told me later, she said that she shared this with him. And then she learned that he had shared it with his wife. And his wife came to her and said, my mother could have written that. And I just feel like I really landed in the right family. So that was really lovely for her to hear. So this next example is written by a couple. And they were setting up their estate plan, which was pretty complicated. And their kids who were in their 20s were going to be receiving distributions of the trust pretty soon. And some of the trusts that they set up, and they really wanted the money to get to them to be seen in context. And this is a really common theme for people who want to create a side document that's personal, that really puts the money in context because they're worried about the money might spoil their kids, and they don't want that to happen. They want to be able to transmit it embedded in values. And so they wrote a document. This was around 12 pages, and it explained what all the trust documents meant in plain English, but then they couched it all and they said, the most important thing is you really understand why we did this and our values around what money can buy and money can't buy, and especially around philanthropy. And so they said to them, the most important matter is not how you got your money or how you're going to spend it. It's how you're going to spend your lives and what kind of people you're going to be. And they used the excuse of this document to write something that they then shared with their kids, so that the children young adults had the chance to have a record of their thinking that they could always go back and look at. If they had questions about the documents, they had a record of what that all meant, but they also had sort of in one place this sort of reinforcement of the values that they had been growing up with their whole lives. And when I asked him afterwards, or a couple of years later, what kind of a difference writing the ethical will made, he said, I think I'm not telling them things that they didn't already know, but it's a reinforcement of it for them. And it's a reinforcement for us. The most valuable part of it for us is we got really focused, especially what we wanted our philanthropy to be and to do. So that was what they felt like the most valuable process was for them. This is.
Can I ask?
Pardon?
Can we ask questions? I didn't want to disturb you if you.
Yeah. Yeah. Can you stick it in the chat? Is it something that needs to be answered right away?
Nope.
Okay, great. Because I'm going to move through these and then we'll have some questions at the end. I'm just conscious of your time as much as anything. So this next example is from a letter of wishes to trustees, which is another really appropriate use of an ethical will, which is a non-binding personal legacy document that accompanies a legal will. Trust language, as you all know, is pretty bare bones, but grantors sometimes have very specific ideas about what they feel would be appropriate and inappropriate, ways for the money to be spent, for the beneficiaries to use. So that put aside letter together for trustees is a great relief to trustees and really helpful to them, and also makes the grantor feel as though they're actually going to be heard over time. And so this one is talking about, let's see here, wait a second. Sorry, I was on another page. Okay, so he says, so they say, and I said, this is also written by a couple. They say, with our experience as entrepreneurs, the idea of them taking their educations and starting businesses is attractive. For this reason, we're in full support of using the capital to start a business. Provided there's a well-structured business plan that's been favorably reviewed by third-party experts, we feel the decision to start a business should rest with the child and should be encouraged, even if you are not wholly in support of it. So you can, for sure, that a lawyer wouldn't want that to be written in the legal document, but the couple really wanted to know their trust, let their trustees know that was, part of their intent. And so that, so a letter to trustees is something that you've probably run into this a lot, where it'd be really helpful to have a side document that went along with the trust. There's another kind of an ethical will, which is sort of an ethical will, which is a letter of wishes, a sort of a statement of intent for a charitable that's attached to a charitable instrument, whether it's a donor advised fund that's going to be assumed by someone else, or a foundation that's going to be taken over by someone else. And this one, it just, in this, it just says essentially what the legal document setting up the instrument fails to do is to capture the spirit behind the decision to create this charitable foundation. So again, the successors, just like the trustees, be really helpful if there was a message that came from you. And just a couple of more. So this one is just where there's dysfunction in a family, where there's broken relationships, where people think that they certainly wouldn't want to depart the world without having said the most important things, it's either I love you or thank you or forgive me, I forgive you, those sorts of messages that are just that are healing. An ethical will can be a wonderful place to put those, because sometimes it's really hard to say those things in writing. And so this is one that was written by a dad. He said, I know I haven't always been the best father. And he essentially asked for forgiveness in this letter that he sent to his kids. He didn't want to die without having said this, having stated this and left this as evidence of them. And then this last one is, again, this really gets at the heart of the ethical will in my sense, which is what your audience really wants to hear from you, which is that, you matter to them, or that they matter to you. And so this is just an excerpt from a 1-paragraph ethical will, just showing how much you can cover in just 1 paragraph. And this is a mother to her 3 children. And she says, I fully expect that I will live for a very long time, to see you well into adulthood and share your future with you. There's much to look forward to. And I am looking forward to being part of all the adventures and all the challenges and all the joys. But if for some reason I'm not, the most important thing you need to know is how much my love for you created the person that you will remember as me. I made you quite literally in my womb, but you made me too. So I'm going to stop sharing right now, and that kind of, I have a wrap up, a conclusion, but I want to just pause here for questions. Oh, good, we do at 5:07. We made up some time, so that's really good. So let's talk a little bit more about this idea of ethical wills, and I want to make sure I've answered any of your questions about them. So let's open the lines here about this. I went through those pretty fast. I hope I didn't exhaust you.
Well, I'm crying, but that's fine. This isn't about me. Beth, do you want to unmute yourself? Because I think your question is a great kickoff.
Sure. So I was just curious if people, clearly I know that people use this in place or in addition to their will and testament or trust, but have you seen anybody use this for like live and in person as a way to open dialogue or discussion? Or have you only seen it being used for the other side? I'm just curious.
No, that's such a good question, because what I always like to tell people is that an ethical will is a monologue, and there's such rich potential when you consider it as a dialogue and open up the conversation to be a dialogue. So a lot of the things you would cover in an ethical will, whether it be for practical reasons, like why you set things up like you did, if you're talking about your estate plan, or why you made a decision that you did, whether it's for personal reasons or practical reasons or personal reasons that are easier to say in writing than they are face to face, to leave off the possibility that you couldn't have a conversation about that, that's a tragedy. So they are. And I gave you an example there of a couple who used it specifically to open up a conversation with their kids about what was in their estate plan. That's a great example of that. people sort of think, well, I think I better wait till I'm really old to do these, because I don't know if I would know everything that I wanted to say, or, I don't think I'm wise enough to create something like this. So I better just wait a little while. And the problem with waiting a little while is that you don't really know what's going to happen tomorrow. COVID has certainly taught us that. There are too many sad stories about people who haven't been able to see or communicate with their loved ones. It's a terrible thing. So we don't really know what's going to happen tomorrow. And so you have to thinking about them as a work in progress, because you are a work in progress too. So to think about getting started, start with something really short. I always say to people, you will get overwhelmed if you think you have to say everything. You can't possibly say everything. The things you really want to transmit to the people that you love, you're transmitting largely the way you're living, the conversations that you're having, the model that you're being. But the most important things, the most essential things you would never want to go unsaid, whatever that is, for personal or practical reasons, whatever it is, put it down. Just put it down. Get started. It might only be a page, and then you can add to it or change it later if you want to, and especially as your audience grows and changes. And that you should really consider, is this something that I would really like to share? Is this something that I would like people to have? Even if I say to them, I'm going to add to it or change it. And I gave you another example of the woman who shared it with her 30-year-old. And it was a beautiful thing, the conversation that they had about it. And then the conversation that she had with her daughter-in-law was a beautiful thing. So, another thing is, I just want to make sure I cover all the points about them. So I'm talking like it's one letter. Well, it doesn't, it's probably not just one letter. There may be multiple letters to different people, or there might be a core letter that's common, and then there's themes and variation, it's a theme and variation where there's individual messages to different people, or it might be separate letters to different people. My ethical will isn't one letter, it's a file. It's actually a collection of letters. And I'm writing a letter to my grandchildren, each of their grandchildren, on their birthdays. And then at age 18, whether I'm alive or not, they'll get what's in that file. That's a way that I'm addressing what I would want to say to my grandchildren. So it's a collection. There's no such thing as a standard ethical will. But what I want you to take away is the idea of intentional communication. People are really intentional about thinking about what they want to transmit to their loved ones in terms of tangibles. We spend a tremendous amount of money and time creating language we can't understand that's only about stuff. And when you ask people, what they want to make sure that their loved ones inherit from them, it's a lot more than the money. A lot more than the money. So that question of what do you want your loved ones to inherit from you, and how are you going to transmit them to them? What do you have to give to them in addition to the money? The ethical will is a place to put down some of that, and try to capture that in a way that's going to be enduring and meaningful and helpful to people. So that's a long-winded answer to your question, Beth. So anyone else have any questions?
I have a question.
Okay, Kenny, you're up.
So I'm just trying to figure out the blocking and tackling approaches to pragmatic approaches. Yeah. First of all, I want to do one, and I may need your help, Susan. You've dealt with our clients a year ago. Yeah. It's a great presentation. I strongly urge you, if you are getting together in this COVID world over Thanksgiving, we used those cards at our Thanksgiving dinner, and it was unbelievable what came out of, we had just lost the patriarch of our family, but the grandmother, we started asking some questions about her childhood and where she was brought up in Utah, and learned so much about her younger years, and she loved it. She was holding court. We had our little, with the cards, we had our little, and we kind of went around the table, but it gave us, so it strongly urges the people that are on this, it's a great gift to give to a client. And it was a great gift that you gave us. And I want my mother-in-law she's the last one living, and the other three kind of left some stuff around, but I wish that all three had done the ethical will. But I'm curious just about how you actually execute it? Where does that document go? Do you share during your lifetime to some extent, which I feel a need to share some of it now personally, but also, tuck some other stuff away. But where does it go? How do you execute it? I know that you can help write them.
Well, yeah, and I mean, yeah,
I can't stand to write,
Mhm.
but I have a
I
good outline.
actually really prefer the role of coach rather than saying I could ghostwrite it for you. But so anyway, sort of in terms of the practical the practical creation of them, it would be terrible to create something on your computer or on a pad or something and have nobody find it. So it's important that if you are working on this, that you put a note with the other important papers and say, I'm also working on this, and this is where you can find it. I'm a big believer in old-fashioned paper because technology is always changing. I mean, you can't listen to watch your tapes anymore. And if you want this to last for a long time, I worry about things that are put in digital formats not being able to be accessible down the road. So if you do something, if it is placed in a digital format, it's on your computer, or it's a video or an audio tape, which some people like to do audio or video versions of these, make sure that something's printed out, a transcript of an audio or video, or that you actually have this on paper someplace, so that it can live for a long time. I was during a presentation earlier this week, and this woman told me about this an ethical will. He didn't call it an ethical will, but it was an ethical will, about a letter that her grandfather had written to her when she was 3 months old. And she knew her grandfather really well. She loved her grandfather, but she didn't know he wrote this letter to her. And they found it in his papers a while ago, and she was completely blown away. And, that was written, it could be found, and many years later, and still had a power to really touch her. So make sure it can be found. That's that's the first thing that I would say. And the other thing is, I've said this before, but you've got to keep it simple. If you sit down and say, I have to be so profound, I have to include everything, and you'll get overwhelmed by it. And so to think about creating something that's just 1 or 2 pages, and I have a format. I mean, I've got this guidebook, which I'm going to show you here in a second. I do have a guidebook, which is a really helpful way to get started to think about what you could write. But the best way is to just get started something short, put the most essential things down, and then add to it as you feel inspired. So that's in terms of really getting started. My message is, don't put it off, get started, but don't be too ambitious about it. Is that helpful? David?
I was just trying to do the chat thing. Do you share any of it during your lifetime, or do you just kind of tuck it away?
That is totally up to you. As I said earlier, in answer to Beth's question, I think there's a lot of benefit from thinking about sharing it during your lifetime and just saying, I'm working on this, I may add to it, but these are some of the things I'm thinking about that I would really like you to know. And to be able to say, if you were to write something like this, what would you put in it? That's a beautiful conversation. And you're not lecturing them. It's a gift of yourself. And so to be able to say, this is part of what I want to give you, and I want you to have it, and I don't want to talk about it, that's a wonderful thing. And because so many things are a lot easier to say in writing than they are face to face. Let's face it, they just are. Things that are, reflective and contemplative and personal are sometimes a lot easier to say in writing. Let's see. So Beth is saying, do you take legal ethical wills for files? You want to open that? You want to speak that?
Sorry, I was the same way. I was trying to type, and I'm just, for our lawyer friends on the call, I mean, is that something that if I'm working with a donor, or if I'm a financial advisor, can I suggest that you take that to your attorney and have that put into the file? I don't know if is that something that you would do?
Well, I think, somewhere or another, it has to be known by the family where it is. So yeah, it could certainly go in the file, or a note it's with the legal documents that the attorney has. that just says, this has also been created, if it isn't actually physically with the papers. But and people have asked me, should I handwrite my document? Should I type it? And what format should it be in? And I think that has to be the format that you're most comfortable expressing yourself in. That being said, future generations may not be able to read your writing, unfortunately. I mean, people aren't being taught how to read cursive. And so you might not be able to be, which is a sad thing, but it's the truth. So, typing might be the way that it lasts the longest, but you would certainly, you've got to date it. You've got to sign your name. Certainly your signature needs to be on it. And as I've said before, this is not a legal document. These are non-binding. So if there's anything in the legal will that is, anything in the ethical will that is, pertains to the legal will, it's a good idea to have a lawyer look at it. In a court of law, the legal will is going to hold water, but you don't want to cause any kind of confusion about intent. So
I guess that's why I was asking the question, is if it's not a legal document, will your attorney still put it into the file?
Yeah,
I was just questioning that. Okay.
And I think it's a question that if it definitely impinges on the legal will, you might want to ask the lawyer for their opinion about that. And you certainly could put it in there.
John, did you have something to share on that? I saw you unmute yourself for a second. Did you have something to share?
I was just, sometimes clients will give me things like that, and they'll even give me instructions to have a meeting with their family after they're gone, and that would be part of it.
Okay.
And I think Susan's right on the money. You don't want to have something in it that confuses what their intent is in the will, because then people will start fighting over, well, Dad said, he really wanted me to have this, even though the will says that. But for the most part, it's pretty straightforward, but most people don't do it. I mean,
yeah.
It's probably a very small percentage of the people that I work with.
Yeah. Well, so this sort of brings me the transition into the close. And that is that the whole idea of an ethical will is something that I think ought to go on your checklist. Even if you are not sure the client wants to do it. And to John's point, a lot of people may say they're going to do it and they don't ultimately get around to doing it. But that doesn't mean it wasn't important to tell them what it is, because they may choose to do it later. It also is a way for them to really think about, well, what do I want to give to my loved ones? When I think about that idea of what I'm transmitting to them, and what I have to give them, and what I want them to inherit. When you're the one that kind of initiates a conversation and suggests that the ethical will can be a way of having them inherit the things that are not tangible, when you plant that seed in their mind that this is an idea of transmitting with intention things that are intangible, values, heritage, stories, feelings, attachments, traditions, when you help them realize that their potential for transmitting those things, it may vary. They may not write an ethical will, but they may do something else. And so it's just to plant that seed in their head is going to sprout somewhere. You just don't know what it is. And so I've come to the conclusion that I can't consider that it's a failure if I suggest to people that they write an ethical will and they don't. Because I really feel like I've probably inspired them to do something else as it's related to the passing on of what's important to them. So I consider that a win. And the thing is about when you bring this into a conversation, you're sort of giving added perspective to this whole question of, legacy. What kind of what do they want their loved ones to inherit? What are the values that they want their planning to reflect? What's the difference that they want to make in the lives of other people? I mean, that's now the kind of context of the planning conversation that you're having with them. That's a much bigger lens than maybe they thought that they were much bigger topic area than they thought maybe they were going to come in when they talked to you about their financial plan, their estate plan, their philanthropy. You've widened the lens a lot in a way that's really meaningful to them. It feels like you're speaking to them and what's important to them, really. So my closing remarks are, don't be afraid to talk about this idea of legacy. I mean, I think a lot of people feel like it's so vague and, what does it mean? And am I going to intimidate my my clients, if I even talk about legacy, are they going to think that I'm going to die? You know, that it's such a big topic, and don't be afraid of talking about it, because when you invite people to talk about it and you put it in the context of what the values are that they want to make sure they're expressing in their plan, or that they have passed on to the next generation, when you put it in that kind of context, people feel a sense of great potential about their ability to make a difference, you know, in the lives of other people. And it makes people feel really good that they are living to their highest purposes, and that they are making a difference in the lives of other people, in their family or beyond. And so it inspires people to talk about their legacy. So don't be afraid of it. Step into it as a way for people to think in the biggest possible terms about what they might want to do. And then it's up to you to step in with your expertise, your encouragement, to be able to make those things happen, to take the action steps to make them happen, to partner with people at the folks at ECCF to help them really think through what their philanthropy might be, and to create a plan that really matches, you know, what their values are, because you know them now, that they're, you know, tied directly to the stories of their life and their values. So that's my larger message, is that you're in a great position with your clients to kind of make them see their lives in way bigger terms maybe than they had before. So I'm going to close and just say that, you know, what you're doing is you're really partnering with your clients to help them think of themselves as being successful as human beings. You know, that's what you're doing. And you are, in that role, you're also getting closer to your own vision of being successful as a human being, because after all, the legacy that you help your clients create is part of the legacy, is part of your legacy. So don't forget that. So thank you very much. We're finishing up just a few minutes early, so I'm certainly open to more questions. I think there are a few more questions on the chat. Stacy, do you want to see if there's anything in there that's?
Yeah, I just, oops, sorry. Dan asked if you had a website, which of course you do, and a beautiful new one, which I included in the chat. So please be sure to look there. I will follow with Susan's information and a way to reach out if that makes sense for you. I think Beth asked if there was any sort of template that you might suggest. I think specifically thinking from an ECCF perspective, but really anyone on the call from an ethical will, is there any template that you might offer?
Well, if I could share my screen one more time, let me just show you what the guidebooks look like. So, you know, I do have a guidebook here, you know, The Wealth of Your Life, a step-by-step guide, which is a kind of a workbook style guide to really kind of open your mind about the things you could put in one. It's a great prop for you to talk about what an ethical will is. Because within the first, you open it up and in the first page, it becomes immediately obvious what this is. So it's a great prop for conversation or a gift to give to clients who might be interested. So that forms in a sense a template. I also have a back-to-back handout, which I'm happy to send you if you're interested in, is with, you know, what is an ethical will, and gives you do's and don'ts and things like that. And that's a back and forth, easy to print out. It's a PDF. I can send it to you. I'm happy to do that. And I can send it and you can send it around, Stacy. This other guidebook is a guidebook for creating an expression of donor intent, which might be quite relevant to people that are setting up funds with you. You know, if you're going to be taking it over, or other people are going to be taking it over after they pass away. And this I created with the Philanthropic Initiative, TPI. It's a great guide for helping people think about really why answering the question of why they set it up. So those are tools for you. So there's my website, Personal Legacy Advisors. So I thank you. Are there any other questions?
I don't see any more in the chat, though, you know, first the thanks comes from us to you, Susan, certainly for your, you know, your generosity through this whole process and just sharing all of this, I think really insightful information, but like you said, you know, a moment for us to reflect on the purpose of what we're doing. I just also want to say, I I'm new-ish to the organization, and I love the fact that, Susan, you're coming to the table as a member of this community, being willing to share what you know and who you are, and that you all are coming to the table as a member of this community to learn and to grow. And I think that there's so much value that we're trying to build here amongst this network, and so much beneficial relationship building to be had. So thank you all very much for sharing your time. Susan, if we were in person, like I would be clapping and woohooing, and I want to do that so bad. Yeah, oh look, oh, they're clapping. That's so great. This is a powerful tool, all you on mute and me loud. I love this. So yeah, we'll follow up at any point. We'll follow up afterwards with some additional resources, certainly Susan's contact information. We're gonna share a brief survey just to hear back about what you learned in this format, what you'd like to see going forward. I am here all day, every day for you. So please let me know how I can be supportive. And once again, Susan, thank you, and all of you, thank you. Have a great night.
Thank you.